Welcome everyone to our Mercury Retrograde in Taurus webinar. You can see on your screen, Mercury will be retrograde April 28th through May 22nd, 2016. Goes retrograde at 23.5 degrees Taurus all the way back to 14 degrees Taurus. Before we get started with our material though, first of all, a few housekeeping slides for us. Here at EAN, you can study with us 3 different ways. You can listen to our free weekly audio podcasts, which you can always find on our website. You can subscribe to our Astro Library, or you can roll in one of our multimedia course segments. Here's a little more information on the Astro Library. You can see we have 3 sections of materials. They cover a dozen-plus years of lectures, workshops, webinars, you name it, by myself and other evolutionary astrologers. You can subscribe for 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that you can cancel at any time. Here's our multimedia course. You see 3 different segments up there. Segments 1 and 2 are available with the materials that you see a picture of on your screen, the binders and the DVDs. Segments 1 and 2 are also available digital only, that you can access from any internet-friendly device, or you can get segments 1 and 2 with both materials and digital. And if you are new to evolutionary astrology, you're always welcome to contact us for help with your learning path. You see our number on the screen, 605-348-5111. And you can always email mediamonk@evolutionaryastrology.net. And you can also take advantage of our sale that we're going to run for the next week on any of the materials found on the Learning Paths page. You see the link right there on your screen, and I'll let Leroy describe this a little more because he's the one who's put a lot of this page together.
Well, at the Evolutionary Astrology Network, we tend to attract a lot of people coming from different places in their astrology studies. So all the way from novices, beginners, to advanced professionals that are studying evolutionary astrology. So we got a little bit of everything on this Learning Path page, and I think I have it kind of outlined in that format: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So there's going to be about 5 products that I put on sale on that Learning Path page, and you see the link right here on this slide. You can go directly there after the event tonight and kind of take a look. For beginners, the elements, modalities, and polarities, the essence of the archetypes of astrology are revealed by what element that archetype is, what modality it is, and of course the polarity. Is it yin or is it yang? So that's a great way to set a foundation for understanding the archetypes of astrology. It's going to be a 14-hour workshop. There's 12 hours on that elements, modalities, and polarities. It's a quite comprehensive piece that Kim Murray produced for our students, and also I put in a couple bonus hours of Mark Jones doing the water signs and the cardinal signs as well. So you get a lot of value there, 14 hours and 25% off. I think I got a price of like $59, so it's tremendous value of hours of material just for a pretty low price. Also in that beginners genre, we have the EA Introductory Workshop, which is a great starter entry-level piece for newer people to evolutionary astrology. It's kind of the Reader's Digest version of the course. 15 hours of EA intro is also repriced on that page. And then in that more intermediate level of people coming to astrology, maybe studied for a couple of years, I have the Planetary Method of Chart Interpretation by Jeffrey Wolf Green. If you want to get a good read of the archetypes from the proverbial horse's mouth of evolutionary astrology, Jeff Green, that's 5 hours of one of his workshops from 1995, I believe, in Amsterdam over in Europe. So that's a fantastic product. And again, all these products I'm describing are streaming video products. You also will get any charts referred to in that on those videos in a PDF format that'll appear on your account pages, after you purchase the product. So again, you'll have access to not only the videos, but to stream from any device with an internet connection, but also the charts and graphics used in that presentation. In more of that advanced or intermediate to advanced area, people that have been familiar with astrology for some time, we have planetary pairs and their cycles, a 7-hour workshop we produced in Scottsdale, Arizona. That kind of talks about the cycle of phases and aspects. Every planetary pair is in continuous relationship with each other by phase and by aspect. So that's a nice piece for those people that have been studying astrology for a while. And lastly, but not least, of course, we did 15 hours in Florida just last February, wasn't it, Kim Marie? I think the Mastering Chart Interpretation videos. You can have access to all 15 hours of that material. And if you're a practicing astrologer that's been reading charts for a while, this will take your chart interpretation to a new level. So Mastering Chart Interpretation kind of brings in that cycle of phases and aspects and deepens your ability to read the archetypes and the repeating themes in that chart. So 5 products on that Learning Pass page. Take a look at them. There'll be something for everybody, and we're proud to offer that at a discount for 1 week only, good till May Day. We'll call it a May Day sale till May 1st, okay? So thank you, everybody, for participating, and I'll go ahead and roll it back to Kim.
All right, thank you, Leroy. And so let's get started with Mercury retrograde. Typically, as we do with these free webinars with Mercury, there tends to be a bit of material to cover. I'll try and give examples as best as I can, and like Media Monk Leroy said, you're always welcome to ask questions. First of all, in general, why planetary retrogrades? They are a geocentric or Earth-centered phenomenon of apparent motion from here on planet Earth. Retrogrades are always the most powerful time of a planetary cycle because any planet that's retrograde, it's always in its closest passage to Earth. Planetary retrogrades will cause a withdrawal from the status quo in order to redefine that planetary archetype according to our own individual natural laws. Now, status quo is going to give strong clues to the kinds of compensations we will each fall into for any planetary archetype. And so you look for that status quo and those compensations via a planet sign, house, aspects. They will be relative to the evolutionary state of consciousness for the soul and any of the environmental conditionings that we have been brought up with this time around on planet Earth. The principle of psychological compensation is being out of sync with your own true nature. And almost all souls, regardless of the evolutionary state of consciousness, will have psychological compensations in order to appear normal to the world and consensus reality. These psychological compensations can take place anywhere there is dissatisfaction. A common compensation for Mercury, for instance, is not speaking up because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or you are projecting how you think they might react, or your own soul just feels too sensitive to say something because you don't want to hurt anybody. You don't want to create an argument. You don't want to create any upsets. You can have the opposite compensation. You can have somebody who is so full of Mercury words and outbursts and interjections that they're compensating by talking all the time rather than quieting down and listening. So it can go to both ends of the spectrum, for instance here with Mercury, with any other as well. But that can just show you how sometimes we'll do these various compensations of a planetary archetype. With Mercury, they're always going to revolve around communications, spoken, written. They're going to revolve around how we process information. Another compensation could be mental self-doubt, not trusting your own mind when it gives you a piece of information. Now, planetary retrogrades offer the opportunity to break free from these compensations and conditionings and align ourselves again with our own individual natural laws. And the answers to any retrograde lessons are always going to come from within ourselves. Now, a planetary retrograde archetype is always non-static. In other words, when a transiting planet is moving retrograde, it is always moving. It is reviewing. It is throwing off. It is re-evaluating. It's in that perpetual state of evolving. You will look to the sign and house that the planet is transiting through to define the retrograde manifestation. You will look to the opposite sign and house in order to provide clarity and expression. In this particular Mercury retrograde, the polarity is going to be Scorpio, which is going to be deep psychological pondering to Mercury retrograde in Taurus. More on that later. The transiting retrograde planet is always related back to the natal archetype, and that archetype is also evolving when that same planet is retrograde. So you look to your own natal Mercury archetype, sign, house, aspects, and this Mercury retrograde is going to have an effect on your natal signature. Both will be evolving where Mercury's transiting in your chart and your natal archetype. Those who were born with Mercury retrograde are going to experience a temporary harmony during a Mercury retrograde transit because Mercury is aligned with the energy that they came in with. So those of you who were born with Mercury retrograde, 3-4 times a year you get to have a sigh of relief and feel like things are actually processing and working normal or as they should. Well, those born Mercury direct feel a little out of sorts. Here's a little Mercury astronomy. Mercury actually goes around the sun every 88 days. And so what that means is that it will end up appearing to have 3 to 4 retrograde cycles a year from our Earth-centered viewpoint. And the retrograde periods last anywhere from 20 to 24 days. This one is 24 days. It is a long Mercury retrograde cycle. Mercury goes stationary 1 day on both turning retrograde and direct. And as you can see from our Earth-centered viewpoint, Mercury is never more than 29 degrees away from the sun. It's elongation. That's why wherever your sun sign is in your chart, Mercury will be the sign before, the sign of, or the sign after. It can never get more than 29 degrees away from your natal sun in the natal chart. Transiting Mercury will appear to go all the way around the circle and the zodiac, as we've probably noticed in our studies of astrology. Here's a viewpoint for you. Here's Mercury coming along. Here in blue, it enters its pre-shadow and makes the first passage. In this case, this cycle will be 14 degrees Taurus, and here it is going retrograde at 23.5 degrees Taurus. This is the whole retrograde cycle here, back to 14, goes direct, and this is post-shadow, and now it moves forward until it gets to that 23.5 Taurus again and moves beyond. This is the visual of how Mercury looks in the evening skies if you were to take the time to watch it for the 2 months that it goes pre-shadow, retrograde, post-shadow. Mercury retrograde patterns. The retrograde cycles reverse through the elements. In other words, water, air, earth, fire. We have come off of retrogrades last year in air, and we're starting to transition from air to earth. They'll spend approximately 1 year in an element and then approximately 1 year transitioning between two elements and back to another element. So 2016, our retrograde cycles start in air to earth, and then they start taking place in earth element, which we have now, Mercury retrograde in Taurus. The next Mercury retrograde cycle will be in Virgo. The one after that will be in Capricorn back to Sagittarius. Next year's retrograde cycles, earth, and then earth to fire. Briefly, Mercury is a dual archetype, meaning at this point in space-time, it rules two of the archetypes in the zodiac. Mercury's rulership of Gemini in the third house is known as the outer side of Mercury because it is the active polarity, energy moving outward. Active mutable air are the polarity, modality, and elements for Gemini in the third house. So it's the archetype of the conscious mind, left brain. Both rulerships, Gemini and Virgo, cover this. Here, Mercury is functioning as how we classify our world around us with facts, figures, labels, all of our things that we use to communicate, all of our language that we use to communicate, especially in, again, detailed way. I am wearing a headset and I am speaking through this headset, and you can hear me on the other side as you listen from your device. So this covers all forms of communication, both written and spoken. Keywords, some of the keywords, this is not an inclusive list. Debate, clever, versatile, twins, excitable, trickster, adaptive, talkative, argumentative. Gemini third house side of Mercury is always about exposing the relativity of truth and any weak link in any philosophy, any situation, any subject. This is that Sagittarius polarity that you see right here. Mercury's rulership of Virgo in the sixth house is the inner side of Mercury, the passive polarity. Here we have passive mutable earth. Still the archetype, as I said, conscious mind, left brain. But here we start to work with an ability to analyze, to reason, to adapt, self-reflect, self-improve. We are able to try and pull things apart, tear them to pieces, to figure out how it's put together. We're going from Mercury of just having labels and classifications to Virgo. Well, how does it work when we start to put it together? So therefore we can also then break it apart. I don't have this in here, but one of the things that Mercury is also known for on the Virgo sixth house side of things is the cup half full or the cup half empty. How we can take the same situation and just by changing that perspective, see it a different way. We will also find Virgo sixth house and its polarity linked to sadomasochism with our patriarchal conditionings. And sadomasochism is full of instilling us with guilt. And when we are made to feel guilty, we will link it to atonement. We either have a natural guilt or conditioned guilt that we need to atone for. Conditioned guilt, we become the victim. Or guilt linked to anger, we become the victor. We want to lash out and get someone else first before they get us. And so this, plus that ability of Virgo sixth house to analyze, can create criticism, inner and outer. And so we are always in process of working to change that inner outer criticism to, what do they call it, constructive criticism? I like to say into constructive possibilities rather than using that word critical. That's the Virgo tear it to pieces apart. And of course this archetype also gets into self-doubt and procrastination, worry, anxiety. Nerves cover both the Gemini 3rd and Virgo 6th. We might notice them more here, but they exist in both of these archetypes equally. In essence, though, this is where we have to learn how to be of service to another or to society. And that's the Pisces polarity that starts to come in here. When Mercury's retrograde in general, we are here to release excess thought. Our minds are saturated. It gets hard to process the information or to take in new ideas. It's a natural time to review and release old, worn out mental patterns, not just from the last 3 months of the last Mercury retrograde, but old patterns from this lifetime and old patterns from past lives. Look at your natal Mercury archetype by sign and by house. And that's going to tell you how your souls come in with old mental patterns. And anytime Mercury goes retrograde, that natal archetype is going to be trying to throw something off. For example, somebody who natally has Mercury retrograde in Taurus can get very stubborn in their communications and their thought processes. And they maybe perhaps develop that from past life patterns where it was a struggle to survive, Taurus. And so they just got a very simplistic outlook on life because I've got to take care of the basics. Don't rock my world. Don't throw things at me. And they're going to have Mercury possibly going over their natal Mercury 3 times. And relative to the Scorpio polarity, there will be confrontations about any of these old patterns that need to be thrown out. Anywhere they're limiting them, where they're being stubborn. I happen to have Mercury going stationary retrograde, 23.5 degrees Taurus, exactly opposite my Scorpio moon at 23.5 degrees. And so I have Mercury opposing natal Mercury, or opposing my natal moon. And so you start to work on these patterns and how you will throw things up and out. So not only am I going to be releasing thought patterns around my natal Mercury archetype, which is also in Scorpio, just not going to be aspected, but I have to throw off old mental patterns around my whole emotional nature, moon opposition. So Mercury, if it makes an aspect to another planet, is going to throw off old mental patterns and thinking and communicating around whatever that planetary archetype it's making any type of aspect to.
Kim?
Mercury, yes.
I just wanted to insert a question here I thought was relevant, as you're talking about all forms of communications. Linda wants to know, does that include body language, sign language, and other forms of physical and psychic communications? Is that all ruled by Mercury?
It can easily get to be part of it, because if you look at some of our modern psychology, they say look at somebody's body language and you can start to get the non-verbal communications. So yes, that can be there in general. However, that's a very good point, because Mercury retrograde in Taurus, Taurus being the first of the Earth archetypes, yes, throwing off old body patterns could be part of it. How many of you are familiar with getting, coming from a parental environment where you had perhaps a lot of verbal abuse, and so you grew up with hunched over shoulders?
Protecting
And
yourself,
so
yeah.
protecting self. So with Mercury retrograde and reaching inward for deeper self-reliance, yes, you could practice that pattern. And look at how head will tell body. Shoulders back, stand up straight. Yes, that can be part of it.
How about psychic communications? Could that invoke a little Neptunian archetype as well?
Well, it's always, Mercury retrograde's always going to do that by this point right here. Mercury retrograde, ruler of Gemini and Virgo, left brain, when it's retrograde, points to the right brain. And so the opposite is of Gemini is Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter. This is conscious beliefs, right brain, intuition. Virgo polarity will naturally point to Pisces, ruler Neptune, which is our deepest unconscious beliefs and what we would call whole brain many times. And so Mercury retrograde in general activates the mutable quadrant, and it points us, again, left brain to right brain, quieting down the mind, turning inward, trusting intuition first, logic and facts second.
Right.
Mercury. Logic, facts, logic, facts, logic, facts. Mercury retrograde, throw it off and allow the intuition to come through.
All right, Linda says thanks.
Yes.
I didn't want to interrupt your flow too much, but it seemed like this is the perfect way to insert that question. So thank you.
Good question. And the fact that this Mercury retrograde is in Taurus pointing to Scorpio, Scorpio is the psychological detective of the zodiac, that will be activated during this Mercury retrograde. It will also be activated because of the Mars retrograde going on in Sag Scorpio. More on that later. So Mercury retrograde, we have to quiet down through all the busyness of a retrograde overload. This is tough to do in our westernized world. How many of you notice Mercury retrograde can tend to create more work, more busyness, and it will take a conscious effort to be able to prioritize things and quiet things down to really be able to reflect mentally and throw off whatever's necessary. Part of it is because we have to have the communications again, and again until we reach clarity. 3 passages, 3 strikes to get it right, or 3 strikes before you're out, 3 chances to get it right, or whatever it is. You know my point. So we have to be open towards, what did you say? Please tell me again. Leroy and I went through that the last hour before the Mercury retrograde when we were doing our own little, did you hear what I said? Well, I told you. Well, did you hear what I said? Well, I told you. Well, okay, let's do it again. Paying attention to all the details, because Mercury is one of the co-rulers in this electronic world of ours. And so nowadays in the modern Mercury retrogrades, regardless of the signs and houses, there are all those little communication details in our techno world that sometimes go smoothly, sometimes do not go smoothly. And it covers not just your computers, but also your phones and your cars and your TVs and all the devices in your households. And so it means many times that we have to do things more than once in order to integrate, evolve, release what doesn't work anymore. And we also have to slow down and do our best to take the time and do it the best way we can. How many things in your world do you need to clean out that closet so you can really find what you want to wear efficiently in the morning before you go to work? And here you are, you were going to do it last Mercury retrograde, and 3-4 months later you still haven't cleaned that closet out. Think of all those little things on your to-do list that you kind of procrastinate. Me, cleaning out my email inbox. And every so often, 3-4 times a year, Mercury retrograde, I'm like, okay, this is when I'm going to really get my inbox cleaned up. You get the point. And Mercury retrograde is always a time in which we seek to gain clarity on the best course of mental actions. It is the time period to redo any mental affirmations, any mental self-talk. And those easily can then reflect out into physical actions. Now, especially with this particular retrograde that comes in the middle of a Mars retrograde. Here are the dates that Mercury is in Taurus, April 5th through June 12th. I added it up, and this year, 2016, Mercury is in Earth signs for 6.5 out of the 12 months. The Earth signs in general are going to slow down communications. They are going to slow down how fast things go. Earth, it quiets us down. It paces us. And Mercury naturally wants to race. So with this retrograde, you really want to take time to take those deep breaths and just be okay with the process, however long it takes. And be okay listening with however slowly someone needs to speak because they're processing as they try to communicate. So it can be that classic. Someone starts out with a sentence, they get halfway through, and they forgot what they were going to say. If you're one of those that do that, I'm one of those that do that, then you go back and start the sentence over. You go back and see if you can remember what sparked that train of thought and follow it through. So we have to be patient with that on the speaking end and on the listening end of things. Here's the Mercury retrograde dates for Taurus. You can see when it had its last conjunction to the Sun. And its next one, you can see that this is what, about 3.5 months to 4 months apart between these superior conjunctions when Mercury's on the far side of the Sun. Here's where it went into pre-shadow. Here's the pre-shadow dates. Mercury retrograde next Thursday, April 28th, 2336 Taurus. Here is the highlight of the Mercury retrograde cycle, which is when it will have its interior conjunction to the Sun. Mercury will be between Earth and Sun. And I think this year Mercury actually even eclipses the Sun. If I remember reading that, I think I remember seeing that this year. What it means is if Mercury was as large as the Moon, it would eclipse the Sun to the point where you couldn't see it. But Mercury's so small that if you actually looked at it through special glasses or telescope, you'd see a little black dot on the surface of the Sun, and that would be Mercury eclipsing the Sun. In other words, their path is lined up in a straight line as we look at it from Earth to Sun. That high point, halfway point of the retrograde cycle is 19.5 degrees Taurus. So if you have planets at right along 19-20 degrees Taurus, they're going to be activated by this Mercury retrograde. But that is the time period where we have that potential to really reach for and find deep levels of inner self-reliance, self-security, self-acceptance, self-love, where we can recognize talents and resources to not just survive but also flourish. All of the Taurian word archetypes can come through during that time period. You can see here, Mercury direct again, May 22nd, 14 Taurus. Here's the post-shadow time period where Mercury makes its direct passage, and of course, its next conjunction. Now, as we've been saying here, Mercury retrograde in Taurus, communication slowdowns, patience, listening, and speaking. And it's inner listening as well. Mercury retrograde is always a time period to listen to our own self-talk. We will catch patterns easier when Mercury's retrograde. And of course, retrograde in Taurus, these patterns are going to come around any place we have security issues, any place we're stagnated mentally, anywhere we stubbornly cling to, this is the way I've always done it. This is the way I've looked at it. Taurus is famous for having to bring all its stuff along with it, all its baggage along with it. Taurus, it can literally be physical baggage, but here it can also be recognizing some of our mental baggage as well. We'll also, of course, Mercury retrograde, receive feedback from others who will point out where they feel we're being a little stubborn or stuck in the mud or limited in values and conversations about how we look at things. In other words, when Mercury's retrograde in Taurus, it will be very easy for security buttons to be pushed, especially outer security buttons, meaning the material world. And what happens is it's that Scorpio polarity of confrontations. Taurus is fixed earth. So whatever patterns we have been clinging to for security reasons, the Scorpio polarity can blow them up in our face. So you really want to be paying attention. I'll talk about this in the Mercury aspects to Uranus. Pay attention to the little voice of change in your head. Pay attention to the little messages. The book that falls off the bookshelf and opens up to the page you need to read. Pay attention to those types of things coming at you in your outer world as well. And anything that points towards making a shift. Fixed earth. Yes, it will cover mental, but with Taurus, it's even going to cover things in our physical environment, especially any resources that give us a sense of security. And nowhere is this going to be stronger than relationships. Relationships is one of our most natural outer securities. But even relationships can get stuck in their patterns, stuck in how two people talk to each other, stuck in how two people relate to each other. And these things can be building pressure to the surface to change. And so what we have to be careful of is stubbornness here. Argumentiveness. Remember, Mercury's rulership at Gemini in the third. Nobody argues better than Mercury. We'll all have that somewhere. But we can really get defensive about defending our perspective and point of views with this retrograde. And we want to reach for open-mindedness as much as we can. We've got to go inward for deeper inner security when the outer world gets upsets. And then we have to, what can be helpful, reflect back to time periods in your past where things went wrong and how you resolved it, how you lived through it, how you made it through. then use that type of reflection to know that you'll make it through anything that happens in this one, in this Mercury retrograde as well, major or minor. Now, this Mercury retrograde in Taurus, death, sex, and I put resources instead of taxes. You've all heard that with Taurus, Scorpio, especially Scorpio. Death, sex, and taxes. The three key words for Scorpio, and that's the polarity. So we can have these types of things going on around us in our life, and we can also see it in the headlines out there. Some of the, typical things that might happen. Again, because Mars will be going retrograde into Scorpio here, and because Taurus and Scorpio cover self-sex, sex with another, respectively, all the relationship commitments can be stirred up through this. Minor degrees, major degrees. We can have those famous betrayals of trust. We can have those love affairs exposed. And so this can be a classic time period where there can be relationship endings. There can be relationships beginnings. That famous love at first sight, hypnotic betrayals with the Scorpio polarity. And we can also have those famous relationship confrontations going on that, again, serve to help us look at things with a different perspective. Taurus wants a secure perspective. Did I say that right? And the Scorpio polarity says, well, let me rock your world and show you a different way to look at things. Now, it doesn't mean that every relationship's going to have upsets. They can just be minor ones that come along for a couple hours or so. But it can go to some extreme things if we've been pretty stuck in any relating patterns. How we communicate and how we look at ourselves, our partner, our relationship. One of the things that you've been seeing taking place here in the pre-shadow of Mercury retrograde, also Mars's pre-shadow, is what we're calling the bathroom laws and all of the transgender and LBGT rights. You can expect some of this to continue to be in the news, to have backlash, to have protests, to have various confrontations of people and or corporations standing up and saying, well, we're going to be open-minded because it helps our bottom line financially. You get the point. Again, all kinds of sexual issues can be intensified here because of the Mars retrograde. Now, without, trying to offend anybody here, Mars is self-sex. Mars is masturbation. And so Mercury retrograde in Taurus is really pondering, how am I responsible for satisfying my own sexual needs? Where am I projecting it onto my partner that they're responsible for my sexual happiness? Both Taurus and Scorpio exist on the zodiacal wheel. One does not cancel the other out. Both sexual perspectives, self-sex, union sex, both need to exist in a healthy sexual environment. So this may come up some way, somehow, if you're in relationship with someone. And because Mars is going to go retrograde in Scorpio, I think it goes back into Scorpio May 27th. It'll be after Mercury turns direct. But Mars has already been through 30 degrees of Scorpio once. The energy is still there in the air. This stuff will still come up some way. Personally for you, in the news. Of course, here, resources, money, and finances. Mercury is going to have trines to Pluto But Pluto in Capricorn does not want to let go of control of the resources. The 1% do not want to give up theirs. The 0.01% do not want to give up theirs. And it's going to be up to those, the other 99%, to demand fairness and equity, Scorpio confrontations, to receive it. You know what you're starting to hear now from a little from Bernie Sanders. Well, he said it all along, but you're starting to really recognize it from the people that he has motivated and gotten excited. He's not just starting a presidential candidacy, as he's been saying, he's starting a revolution. And it has to come from the grassroots up, has to come from the ground up. And it won't be over no matter who we elect for president. And so this Mercury retrograde could have a lot of people, along with Mars retrograde in Scorpio, waking up and going, how do we have a fair and equitable redistribution of all of these resources? How is this pondering going for you? Where are you being active in that role? So we can find that resources can be lost or gained here depending upon any prior efforts made, depending upon karma, both this life and past lives. You know, once the distribution of resources get this extreme, sooner or later there has to be some pressure built up, usually some money scandal, that then has us changing laws, that has people getting active again. Mercury could be some triggers here. Stay tuned. Let's see where it takes us. But on a personal level, how are you having to look at your security issues around resources? Are they all tied up in how much material stuff you have or how many zeros are in a bank account? Or are you being able to reflect and ponder and see yourself as a resource, knowing you will survive and be okay no matter what? And ultimately, seeing and relating to ultimate resource, source energy, that's the most developed or spiritually evolved archetype of Taurus, is the ultimate resource, source itself. And can Mercury access into that through Scorpio and then work to calm yourself down throughout these changes that are happening in our world? Our values around resources in general are evolving here. And so, again, like I said, this is a good time to clean out the clutter around resources, both literally and mentally. You know, what do they talk about? If you want the new to come in, then clean out some space to make room for it. And so this could be a natural retrograde cycle to literally clean out physical stuff, to even clean out the body temple if you wanted to. Mercury is going to be in orb of grand trine to Jupiter and Pluto all the way through its retrograde cycle. This can be a time period to become aware. Use that Scorpio psychological polarity to become aware of evolving talents from within yourself. Simple as new ways of changing your self-talk, but recognizing new things that you might want to start along with. I have had a nephew who literally in the last few months, just after he's 29, so he's been going through the Saturn return this year 3 times as well. But he's literally been recognizing that he loves woodworking. And it's just naturally coming out of him. He is teaching himself with the internet, but it's just like pondering and recognizing, and he works a job, but he's realizing that if he keeps working with this talent that's surfacing for him, he can take it into part-time job and perhaps make it into something that he does down the road. So the sparks of insight, Mercury, can come here for new talents for all of us. Just Taurus. Taurus is survival. Well, we all survive by what we're good at. So what's coming up for you? Of course, remember, Mercury retrograde in Taurus, it is so important to remain open. Open, inner, outer listening, open, inner, outer communications. Ask for the feedback. Take a deep breath when the feedback triggers you. Mercury retrograde in Taurus can just want to crawl in its little hole and not speak to anybody until it's over with. And that's not the intent of this retrograde. It can mean that we sometimes have to rest and recharge batteries, that we have to quiet that mind. But when the communications come at us, be as open as you possibly can. Now the Scorpio polarity, bottom line, it's recognizing that we don't get to control that outer world. We don't get to control what is outside of us and beyond us. What we do have power with, Scorpio, is how we react and respond to whatever does come up in our world. And if you are someone who has been studying and pursuing evolutionary astrology, you start to recognize that things just don't randomly happen. There is a natural law and order to the world. There's a natural cycle and process to things. And so if we have any of those Scorpio plutonium explosions, can you reflect back and see what built that up? Where was I stuck? Where was I mentally stuck that I wouldn't take a different look at something? And any time our outer world is thrown topsy-turvy, it throws us inward on ourselves, back to that inner self-reliance, to then go out into the world and face it again. So it's very possible that this retrograde cycle will have confrontations that have built up over time. And if it does, they are necessary changes coming along. And so the changing situations and landscapes will reflect how we have to change our old attitudes, values, our old ways of mentally processing, because it doesn't fit with the evolution in our world. The Scorpio polarity will also bring up those conflicts of the soul's dual desire nature, the separating desires, another car, another purse, another house, another lover, another blah blah blah, and the returning desire to no source. And in natural law is the exhaustion of the separating desires that then moves us naturally towards why am I here? What is my purpose? What are my lessons? And where did I come from? The returning desire to source. So this is a natural time period to reflect what no longer serves my soul. Just simply ask that question. What doesn't serve me anymore? And ask it, and ask it. And Mercury retrograde will bring that information into consciousness for you. Scorpio is also where we come up against the limits of power and powerlessness. This is where it becomes necessary to merge with a greater source of power than ourselves, separating or returning, in order to osmosis it into us and become more than we were before. So under the current circumstances, what is and is not possible for you to do in your world? I love to garden, and there's nowhere that I find source energy better than in my garden. I got some pictures for you here coming up. But I have to recognize Taurus, physical earth, exactly what I can and cannot do with my body anymore. And rather than let myself get mercurial frustrated, Mercury opposing my natal moon and having one of my Scorpio outbursts, I sit there and have conversations and going, well, how can I change the way that I do this? I'm always looking for one of my Pluto Scorpio young bloods that have more muscle power than me and going, who's next in line with my young bloods close by that have a love of gardening that I can teach and they can help? So I'm learning how to merge with others to do things that I myself cannot do. Look at wherever you're at. What is possible and what is not possible in your world? How do you make peace with it? How do you, Scorpio, merge with something else in order to evolve? And so then it's going to show you what are the directions you want to put energy into as you review this desire nature within your soul. And if you're in relationship, as you review the desire nature between the two of you and together as a unit. So, the Scorpio polarity demands a deep inner psychoanalysis to realize where we are stuck mentally, where we just keep playing the same loop over and over and over again. Can you mentally go, stop, cancel, and rephrase it? Stop, cancel, rephrase it. And just make that effort all the way through, no matter how many times. The Scorpio polarity allows us to recognize where our motivations are, what our intentions, desires, and emotional patterns are. And what are the intentions, motivations of others we're in relationship with? If we're in some type of relating with someone, intimate or otherwise, and they don't have our highest and best good in their intentions, it can be revealed here. If somebody's trying to manipulate us or control us, this Mercury retrograde cycle will show it. The Scorpio polarity will bring in those deep, intuitive hits, the emotions in the gut of your stomach. Don't gloss over it mentally. Let Mercury retrograde cause you to stop, Taurus, and look at it and go, why? And you may find that you don't want to relate to this person anymore, or you may have to challenge them, Scorpio, confront them and call them out on it, and metamorphose, hopefully, into new patterns together. So we can attract in other people in a positive way, will motivate us, especially those who are reaching for their own deeper inner self-reliance, Taurus, and then can act as positive role models for us, or as even positively supporting and helping us. Or, as I just gave, we can run into the negative examples of those who are trying to use us, abuse us, manipulate us, whatever, control us, and we may have to, Taurus, break free, end it. You know, the whole death and endings, literally and figuratively, can come all the way through this Mercury retrograde. You know, look at how this Mercury retrograde has just captured so many people's attention with the artist Prince unexpectedly dying. And I think part of it is just around this Mercury retrograde in Taurus and the finality of it all. One moment here, another moment gone. I lost someone whom I was very close to here in the month of April, quite unexpectedly, overnight. Didn't think he would go in 10, 20 years, and had a strong, strong emotional effect on me. And just really second look at, you never know who's going to go when. So don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. Really, cherish and love those whom you are with, because they could be gone in a moment. And so this polarity also asks us to find the courage to get unstuck and make any of those changes that are necessary in our life. Not just the mental changes, but to make the physical changes as well, Taurus, Earth sign. Prioritize all those resources and throw out what no longer serves you. Now, astrology in general many times will just use what we call the major aspects, trines, sextiles, squares, and it will miss a lot of aspects with Mercury retrograde because Mercury moves so fast that it makes several aspects to planets during its retrograde cycles. The previous retrograde cycle that we had in January, remember Mercury went retrograde at 1 degree Aquarius all the way back to 15 Capricorn? Mercury aspected every single planet during that retrograde cycle. It was the busiest one of this year. This will be the Mercury retrograde with the lowest number of aspects. And that's countered in some ways by the fact that Mars is on the opposite side of the zodiac during its retrograde cycle, which is the most frustrating retrograde cycle, Mars retrograde. And both Mercury and Mars retrograde are making aspects to Uranus, Pluto. Mercury made aspects to Uranus, Pluto in the last retrograde cycle. I think it does the next one too. Don't quote me on that. But they're both Mercury and Mars making aspects to Uranus and Pluto, the waxing square base node, as I call it. So that alone can shake things up and still make this a pretty active Mercury retrograde, especially in regards to the endings and new beginnings, and in regards to the whole resources, endings, beginnings, changes. Now, here at EA, if you're not aware of this, we use the whole cycle of phases and aspects. Every planet in your chart, this is the generic 0 to 360. Every planet in your birth chart is in a phasal relationship to every other planet. And within that phasal relationship, there may or may not be an aspect. And so here's the listing of the aspects from 0 to 360 and the phases it's contained within. And so if this is new to you, I think that's one of the things Leroy said that we were going to put on sale with the 25% discount. I highly, highly recommend learning the cycle of phases and aspects in any study of astrology. This is the glue that puts it together. And I was so blessed to find this when I first started studying astrology 30-some years ago, because this was in Jeffrey Wolfgreen's teachings from the very beginning. Now, a lot of these keywords came from Dane Rudier's work. And his original book describing all this is the lunation cycle. And he went through this cycle of phases and aspects in relationship to the sun and moon. That's why you can probably recognize crescent, first quarter, gibbous. Astronomy and weathermen don't really use disseminating last quarter or balsamic. Sometimes you see it, but when you can really get these 8 phases, it takes a lot of the complexity out of aspect interpretation away. It helps you create it and build on it. So sorry for my little mercurial side note here and my passionate Scorpio polarity. Teaching, pleading, insistence on learning this to really take your astrological awareness to a new level. So here's the Mercury retrograde aspects. Each of them are 3 times except where noted. Mercury, 2 waxing semi-sextiles to Venus, 3 waxing trines to Pluto, 3 waxing semi-sextiles to Uranus. Venus and Uranus kind of hanging out together in Aries. And then, of course, North Node waning trine Mercury, South Node waxing sextile Mercury. And then Mercury has 1 conjunction to Venus. Now, we were talking about Mercury retrograde in Taurus, Mars retrograde in Sag Scorpio, which, by the way, is available as a webinar. We did that one a week or so ago. That's on the forecasting webinars page if any of you still want to catch that one and get some of the Mars retrograde details. They're only going to have 1 opposition, and it isn't going to happen until right after Mercury leaves its shadow. More on this in a few slides. Here's Mercury's retrograde, stationary retrograde chart. I always do them 0 degrees Aries so that anybody listening anywhere around the world gets a generic impact. There's other aspects going on, but all the way through this, you're going to see, Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, Grand Trine going on here. As you can see, there's enough orb within trines between various planets that they start to pull all these planets in from these signs. And of course, we have what we call the spiritual T-square with the Virgo Pisces planets split squared by Mars balsamic Saturn as well. And so these configurations, this grand trine, which will help ease up Mercury's stuckness, stubbornness. This can offer some relief and balance to the resources. They may not be quite as major upsets. Again, totally depends on prior efforts, karma. But the grand trine is in configuration throughout this retrograde, so is the spiritual T-square. Here is the interior conjunction, the halfway point of Mercury to reversing back over the sun at 19.5 Taurus. You can see Venus starts to move in here. We still have the trine aspect. We still have the spiritual T-square. Here is Mercury stationary direct, May 22nd. The spiritual T-square gets pulled into almost a grand cross in mutable signs, if you want to call it that. We still have Mercury coming as close as possible. It's not going to make trines to Jupiter, but you can see that it's going to be an orb for a lot of the retrograde cycle. What also happens is the day before full moon of Sagittarius takes place. The same day Mercury goes direct, it's the halfway point of the Mars retrograde cycle to the sun. So there's some potent energy when Mercury goes stationary direct, May 22nd at 14 Taurus. Mars is going, the light bulbs of truth and inspiration and actions are going off for Mars. And as a matter of fact, at the end of this Mercury retrograde, the halfway point of the Mars retrograde cycle, this can be an excellent time period, the end of May, early June, of things starting to break loose for us and unwind, move forward, mentally, actions, Mercury, Mars. So this would be a little strong time period right in here when this is all taking place for us. Mercury waxing Venus. There's two of them. We've already had one. You see the next one that we already have both of them. Because what's today? I lose track of my days. I know it's Monday. It's the 25th, isn't it? Yep, we've just had it. 24th, somewhere along there. But Mercury and Venus are always having aspects during a Mercury retrograde. During Venus retrogrades, they're too close together. So there's always waxing, waning aspects going on between them. So our conscious mind, left brain, and our values are always in process of review and evolution. When Mercury is ahead of Venus, which is what it's doing right here, Taurus to Aries, 30 degrees. When Mercury's ahead of Venus, we can be racing ahead without consideration of our values and what's important. So then Mercury retrograde, it backs up. And when it aspects Venus, it's backing up to review what's important, what do we value. This is emphasized because Mercury's retrograde in Taurus, one of the signs that Venus rules. And so Mercury is going to be re-evaluating any of the Taurus keywords: mental stubbornness, fixed opinions, hoarding, security issues, self-esteem, self-reliance, all the issues we've started to speak about, talk about. Venus in Aries has started a new annual cycle of what do I value? How do I want to give and receive in my world? What is important to me? And so Mercury always activates that. Now, Mercury has a retrograde with Venus before it goes direct, right here about 17 degrees Taurus. However, Mercury is going to have 3 conjunctions to Venus throughout the course of this summer. As you can see here on your screen, 17 Taurus, 6 degrees Leo, 29 degrees Virgo. And look at right here, the 3rd conjunction, August 29th, the next day, we start the next Mercury retrograde cycle at 29 Virgo. So be pondering on this, because while Mercury is in Taurus has been 30 degrees ahead of Venus, it is now going to slow down and fall behind, and then have another conjunction in Leo, another one in Virgo before it goes retrograde. So the whole summer could almost be a time period for pondering what's important to us, especially around all of the Venus Venetian words. Taurus, resources. Leo, love. Virgo, work. Leo, creativity. Virgo, self-improvement. Mercury conjunct Venus 3 times. It really is about learning to honor and love ourselves. It's a conjunction. We're having a death and rebirth conjunctions on all the many ways in which we are honoring ourselves, loving ourselves throughout this summer. This will play into the Mars retrograde review of what we desire. And are we achieving our own self-reliance, Taurus polarity? And then moving forward in our life with that. And we all can be doing this regardless of climate change, regardless of the U.S. presidential election, regardless of any terrorism on planet Earth. We, each of us, still have a right to live our life, to have our direct connection to source energy regardless of what's going on. And those of you who have ever had any personal sessions with me one-on-one, one of my favorite cliches, the relationship we have with source energy is identical to the relationship we have with ourselves. The relationship we have with ourselves is identical to the relationship we have with source energy. Got that? It's an inside job. Treating ourselves better is treating source better. Honoring ourselves, honoring source. Loving self, loving source, source loving us. So we don't always get 3 Mercury-Venus conjunctions. Sometimes they'll just meet once and move on. So this one is pointing out some time to really value and love ourselves through the course of this summer. Now, the Mercury opposition to Mars. Mercury finishes up its post-shadow June 7th. It reaches that 23.5 degrees Taurus again. And then a couple days later, it finally has an opposition to Mars. Mars will still be retrograde. This is going to be 26 degrees Taurus and Scorpio. So this will be the most active point. If you have planets in Leo and Aquarius in those, the last third of the signs, that's going to be the most strongest when Mercury makes this opposition. From May 27th through June 12th, Mercury will be in Taurus and Mars retrograde will be in Scorpio. So just those dates, May 27th through June 12th, they won't be exact that long, but they'll be opposite by archetypes of their signs. So this will be the most intense part of the Mars retrograde cycle, because Mercury's going to be on the other side, pointing to what Mars needs to learn. Mars is going to be finishing it up with Mercury and going, what did you learn? And so Mercury-Mars, walking our talk. It'll be at the end again of the Mercury retrograde cycle, so by then, hopefully we have reestablished an equilibrium and an inner self-reliance, and we have been finding that courage to make those evolutionary leaps forward in our life, however it's being presented to us in the universe, however we have been in process of co-creating. So again, that fixed modality, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, is going to get the most shakeup. So resource upsets, the relationship upsets, the things we've already spoken about before in the Taurus, Scorpio keywords and archetypes. This stuff will be coming through. It can feel like the Mercury retrograde is lasting a longer because it's pulled in by this Mars retrograde. And the Mars retrograde will make Mercury retrograde feel more intense. With the fixed modality, it's just like fixed says, we want to sustain, we want to persevere, we want things to stay the same. And so with the fixed modality, pressure builds up until something explodes. What happens is we have what we call resisting forces and evolutionary forces. And so the fixed modality can get caught up in those resisting forces, and it will resist, resist, resist until the evolving forces overcome the resistance. So this is where the open-mindedness Mercury comes in. The more open-minded we can be in recognizing our resistance and let go and move, the more we calm down the explosion, the cataclysm. And of course, I put it in on this slide, but I just feel like we can sense it all the way throughout the Mercury retrograde in Taurus, the Mars retrograde in Scorpio. Who else will be looking at with obituaries? personally and publicly. Two of the signs of death and rebirth, both literal and figurative, are Taurus and Scorpio. Scorpio, again, classic astrology, death, sex, and taxes. Now, from evolutionary astrology's perspective, perhaps maybe even astrology in general, I'm not the type of astrologer that looks at anything and says, it's going to be a literal death. That's a disservice. I think from the broader humanistic perspective, a soul has more than one opportunity to stay or go. And who are we in the world of astrology to say it's going to be this time and not that time? And I always invite people to look at it from a figurative aspect. What in your life is being presented with completion, finishing up, some type of death and rebirth. And if you look at it from that figurative perspective, then you find that you have put yourself in a psychological and emotional perspective and intention of moving through that energy rather than perhaps building it up to some type of cataclysm that may include something literal. So while we can speak about it in general, it is a subject that you must be very careful and sensitive to in regards to working with any clients or friends or issuing out any predictions or projections. Nobody can play God that well. And that's the worst thing that we want to do, is play God. Because as we'll all learn at some point in second stage spiritual states of consciousness, you're going to get knocked down off the totem pole for wherever your soul thinks it can play God. We are a channel for the ultimate source to come through. Now, the intent of this opposition is to expose anywhere outer security is limited and replace it with a deeper inner security. Meaning throughout this entire Mercury and Mars retrogrades, pre and post shadows, who do I trust? What do I trust? How do I learn to trust my own instinct, my own intuitive gut response, reaction? Don't brush it off, Mercury retrograde. Investigate it, Mercury retrograde. So here we are looking at a whole spring and summer of adjusting our attitudes and our actions. And how do they need to metamorphose? How do they need to evolve? Small steps, big steps. And one of the things that we have to be careful with is, that old cliche of doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results? We have to learn how to do it differently. We have to learn to evolve into a different perspective of it and learn how to take action differently around whatever subjects are coming up for us. We also have to be careful of wanting everyone else to make all the changes while we stay the same in order to be secure. So you want your partner to change, but you don't want to change. And it doesn't quite work that way. Relationships typically require both people to change in order to evolve the relationship. Mercury is the waxing semi-sextiles to Uranus, as I said, 3 of them. And what this will bring up for us is an insecurity around moving forward in life. Mercury in Taurus wants to ground whatever has been changing, whatever any new beginnings are that are taking place for us. And so there's going to be a back and forth between wanting to ground the new and needing to move forward more yet. So where are you yourself looking at things needing to change, move forward, and you're resisting? Do your best to pay attention to any future-orientated messages coming through here. Mercury's conscious mind, Uranus is the individuated unconscious mind. Past, suppressed present, and future. And so Uranus will be sending these mercurial messages up. And we want to listen. We want to pay attention when they come through. Uranus will tell us where we're stuck. And it will create the upsets if necessary. 30 degrees, waxing semi-sextile is new phase. Remember those 8 phases? It's new phase. It's moving forward. With or without your willingness. So these aspects are really going to come down to open-mindedness versus stubbornness. Mercury's waxing trines to Pluto, here they are. They're all happening right around 17 degrees Taurus to Capricorn. So as you saw from that grand trine, anything you have in these degrees, 15 to 20 degrees, Taurus, Capricorn, Virgo, these are the trine energies. This is where it's smooth. This is where you can move through and do things if you want. Now, we can have both resource upsets and rewards. Waxing trines are usually personal rewards if we've made the prior efforts. If we've not made the effort, nothing can happen. And because they're 2 earth signs, things can go wrong in the outer physical world. And so be observing this. And any efforts you make at a waxing trine, this is first quarter phase that the aspect falls into, you're still building. So you can still put an effort in here and really move forward. Move forward with your own talents and resources. Move forward in career. Move forward with how you want to simplify your physical life on planet Earth. Move forward with how you want to share resources on planet Earth. This is the aspect that will be excellent for communications around resources and work. And that includes listening, taking the time to understand how things work and move and make changes as necessary. What we can look at the trines, what I will sometimes call the couch potato aspect, because it's so easy and smooth, I think I'll just stay right here. We can look for a lot of control games going on and a lot of resource manipulations, especially between haves and have-nots. We can look at material, excuse my burp again. We can look at material excesses and spending beyond our means and just thinking that, we'll always have these types of resources. And 6 months from now, our income could change. So there needs to be a pondering of how you value resources, of how you work with your resources. There may be changes to how you budget with your resources throughout this retrograde cycle. Here's Mercury's trines and sextiles to the nodal axis. This is a good time period for understanding and evolving communications. Virgo, North Node in Virgo, Mercury sign. We can, again, trines and sextiles. We can make efforts, and any efforts we make will easily move forward and make progress. Now that South Node in Pisces is a waxing sextile to Mercury. So this is opportunities to release the past. The North Node is a waning trine to Mercury. So here is where self-improvement with ourselves and others, self-responsibility, working through work and career efforts can be going on here. This can also be a time period for emotional growth because it's the nodal axis of the moon. And if we let go of old emotional wounds and victimizations, Pisces, and we utilize that Scorpio polarity for courage, we can really mature emotionally. We can make steps forward emotionally, evolutionary leaps emotionally. We can also put our feet on the ground emotionally and really look at what we can achieve and what we cannot achieve, what we can do, what we cannot do. Of course, distortions here is laziness. That's one of the things throughout this Mercury retrograde cycle that you have to be careful of with Taurus. Taurus will go so far and stop, and we'll get lazy. And with the North Node in Virgo, we can get into excuse making. South Node in Pisces, it's everybody else's fault. Be careful of working or settling for any of this as you are moving through. So this Mercury retrograde cycle, I've just really wanted to get more through some of the archetypes. I didn't put a whole bunch of charts in. I do have the United States chart. So I've moved through the majority of the material. I've moved through the material. I have a couple of slides left. What I guess if there's any questions or comments on archetypes that I've not discussed or I forgot or I didn't flesh out enough, very willing to answer any questions on the archetypes. You can raise your hand if you have a headset and got yourself lined up to speak live, or you can type questions in on the Q&A board and Leroy can share them with me. I use the Gemini rising chart for the US, and that's the 2:13 a.m. on July 4th, 1776 Philadelphia. This Mercury retrograde will take place intercepted in the 12th house with this chart. Because it's going to have 3 first quarter squares to the moon, and the moon is the public, we can have a lot of public polarization and stubbornness around all issues. We haven't seen any of that going on, have we? We haven't seen any extremes between liberal and conservatism going on, have we? Look for more of it. With Mercury in the 12th house, there might be a lot of deniable plausibility going on. I didn't steal the pennies out of the cookie jar. We could have scandals around resources. We could have budgets coming to light when we realize, how much money is being spent on XYZ that none of us were aware of. Like I said, this Mercury retrograde will waxing square the moon, public opinion. It will have waning semi-sextiles to Mars 3 times. I think that's going to be part of the stubbornness of public opinions as well, and the polarity of public opinions going on. Mercury will make 3 waning in conjuncts to natal Saturn for the U.S., Saturn in Libra, still that polarity of opinion. The waning in conjuncts, the 210 degree marks between these two planets, this is adjustments that we are in process of making on collective levels. International students, thank you for letting me use a U.S. chart example. Outer adjustments, for example, all of the bathroom laws, Taurus, 12th house, Mercury, all of a sudden we're communicating about everybody's sexual orientation and a very private thing, peeing and pooping of all things, and who can do it and who can't do it and where you can do it and where you can't do it. And Leroy and I listened to Bill Maher, if any of you know who he is, the comedian on HBO, and he gave the most greatest example. He says, any of you who grew up with two gender parents and brothers and sisters, you learn how to go in one bathroom, or nowadays, houses have 3 and 4 bathrooms in the U.S., but it was a good point. How far through time have we come where this hasn't been an issue? But this is the waning in conjuncts, our outer adjustments. And Saturn is authority, and Saturn's going to be how we take philosophies and turn them into laws. And Libra, the polarity around it. Neptune will make 3 waning trines or Mercury will make 3 waning trines to Neptune. Oh, Mercury, because it goes direct. Let me back up. Because Mercury goes direct at 1420 Taurus, it is going to have the 2nd and 3rd in conjuncts to Saturn. At the end of its retrograde cycle, it is going to turn stationary direct on this aspect. And so it will be in orb. Remember that May 22nd, Mercury direct? It's going to be in orb probably May 12th through June 30th. So we could have a good 10 days that Mercury is squatting and an inconjunct to the Saturn. So that second half of May, expect a lot of public disagreements in the news, not just on bathroom laws, but our politicians as well. Donald Trump right now, the whole election process is shady. Yeah, I think it should be direct votes in primaries and in the general election, not the Electoral College if you've studied any of that. But Donald loves it when it works for him, and he hates it. He likes to criticize others, but he doesn't like to be criticized. Mercury, Saturn, guess what? So more in the news around him, and who knows what else. Mercury to Neptune. Mercury, remember, is getting ready to go retrograde 23.5 Taurus. So it's going to have 3 waning trines to Neptune. And right now, stationary retrograde, it's an orb. And I sometimes think that this Mercury-Neptune trine can be part of our grief, for instance, around the artist Prince right now. Mercury retrograde in Taurus, it can be physical losses. It can be death. And that trine to Neptune, recognizing what a musical icon he was in so many, many different genres of music. It is an aspect where we could really ponder a lot of beliefs. The Neptune and Virgo generation, of which a lot of the Pluto and Cancers are, by the way, a lot of our Pluto and Cancer generation share Neptune and Virgo along with the U.S. And this is the opposite side of Neptune's rulership, and there can be a lot of spiritual negativity, that inner outer criticism, that judging, that my religion's better than your religion that goes on here. Look at how we as a country criticize other belief systems in the consensus state. And so Mercury could do more of that with these aspects. Mercury in Neptune's own house could come to deeper understandings with it. So those are the aspects that are highlighted in this Mercury retrograde to the U.S. chart. Any comments or questions, Leroy, coming in?
Yeah, this might be relevant. You know, most people on this call will, of course, know that Taurus is square Leo on the zodiacal chart, and one of our associates has that retro Mercury in Taurus, of course, square natal Mars, Pluto, Saturn. All three planets retrograde in Leo. So again, we talked about the fact that, you know, the retrograde thing can be kind of topsy-turvy. If you were born with a lot of retrograde energy, it can be kind of a positive time. How would you read that tension of the square with three powerhouse planets, Mars, Pluto, and Saturn, retrograde in Leo?
Well, I'm actually hearing two questions. I'm going to answer it with the planets direct. I'm going to answer it with the planets retrograde, okay? First of all, Mercury's retrograde cycle in Taurus from 24 to 14 degrees. For those souls who were born between 1947 to 1953, you more or less will have Mercury waxing square natal Pluto in Leo 3 times. And so that means to the depth of your soul, Pluto in Leo, you are having to make an effort, waxing square, to communicate differently, to ponder and process everything relative to your soul differently. Pluto in Leo is creativity. You're going to have to look at pondering new ways of creating resources for yourself that can allow you to express your creativity. That's in general for this generation. And what you have to be careful of in general with this Mercury in Taurus retrograde square to natal Pluto is any stubbornness. Well, I've always done it this way. This is how I've made my living up to this point. This is how I want to express my creativity. Well, again, the Aquarius polarity for your generation says you've got to create what's relative to society or it doesn't matter. And so Mercury is really being challenged to let go of any areas of stubbornness for this generation. Now, to answer your question, this chart example had Pluto retrograde natally, and they just happened to have Mercury in Taurus retrograde natally. So this could be a time period.
No, the transiting retrograde Mercury in Taurus.
Oh, just okay.
Transiting, yes, but all those other planets are retro in the natal chart. So again, I wanted to kind of explore the generic version of the retrograde planets square a natal transiting planet, Mercury.
Got it. Well, so everything that I just said, Mercury waxing squares to Pluto and Leos, you know, the need to move forward and ponder new ways of creating resources and pondering new ways of your relationship to the physical world, Mercury. If Pluto's retrograde, Pluto in Leo generation, when it's retrograde, what can go on then is it's either going to increase your resistance to looking at things differently, or it's going to open you up to it, because that's the intent. The Pluto in Leos who were born with it retrograde, you're throwing off subjectivity. You're reaching toward Aquarian objectivity. And you can use the squares of Mercury to Pluto retrograde natally, Mercury to the square to the Pluto polarity point. You can use that Mercury retrograde and the tension of that to open up Scorpio polarity point, here we are activating that fixed modality. You can open up and have leaps of growth mentally. Mercury-Pluto as a planetary pair always wants mental security. Mercury, mental, Pluto, security. And so these waxing squares can be throwing off security. How well is your soul dealing with it? How well can you reach over to the Aquarian polarity and be objective? In the same vein, if I may move on, something else, Leroy?
No, thank you. That was very clear. Thank you.
Let me just look at the Pluto and Virgo generation. For those of you born more or less 1964 to 1970, you're going to have Mercury in Taurus make waning trines to your natal Virgo. Oops, I just realized my mistake. I'm looking at this screen, not first quarter squares. Thank you. My Mercury picked up on it. Let me back up. Last quarter squares. That changes everything. This is how you're going to get the difference between first quarter, last quarter. What I just said about the Pluto and Leo, some of that might work, but Mercury in Taurus is a last quarter square. Here, let me do this. I want to go back.
You just reviewed how important that planetary pair is in the cycle of phases and aspects.
I did. And so I want to show you this, okay? And so on the natural zodiac, okay, right here is the Leo part. Right here is the Taurus part. So Mercury is a last quarter square to the Pluto and Leos in the natural zodiac. This is the natural zodiac, 0 to 360s. The last quarter squares, this is not about creating resources. This is about surrendering and releasing your perspectives and beliefs and values around resources. Because if we would put Pluto Leo right here, we would have to go 3/4 around the zodiac to get to Mercury in Taurus. So the Pluto Leo to Mercury in Taurus is a last quarter square. And this brings in crises in consciousness or belief as an aspect. So this is going to emphasize reviewing resources and what's important to you and what's not important to you. You could find resource rewards in creativity coming off of the disseminating phase and disseminating trine. Again, everything's in relationship and a process of evolving. You could be coming off some resource rewards here. You could also find yourself letting go of stuff. You know, the Pluto and Leos, you're the baby boomers. You've been better at collecting stuff than anybody else. Do you need all that stuff? Do you need all that resources? You could find yourself simplifying your lives because you don't need it all. So there's a crisis in beliefs around resources. You may find resource upsets. Perhaps you've lost some. Did you have prior overspendings, Pluto and Leo? Did you have prior overabundance with resources that perhaps you didn't pay attention to or manage? Some of our baby boomers are finding themselves with no retirement savings because they didn't make the effort. On the deepest levels, Pluto Leos with Mercury and Taurus last quarter square, you have got to ponder an inner relationship to the ultimate resource, source energy itself. And how do I graciously move through, Pluto Leo, these autumn years of my life? Now, if we put Pluto right here at the 0 mark. And if you have an actual chart, you could then, I'll go show you with the US chart again, but right here with the balsamic chart, if you put Pluto Virgo here, okay, you go 2/3 around the chart to get to the Pluto, the Mercury Taurus, okay? And so those of you born approximately 1964 to 1970 have Mercury and Taurus making waning trines to Pluto and Virgo. This definitely is resource rewards. The waning trine, 240 mark, falls in the disseminating phase society. Waning trines are outer rewards, okay? This is where society recognizes us. This is where society says, good job. And this is where we disseminate everything we've learned from the first, 2/3 of the cycle back into society. Society loves us, we love society. And so if you've made prior efforts in work, Pluto Virgos, you could see that things come through smoothly here. If you've made excuses, Virgo, if you've procrastinated, Virgo, waning trine, if you just didn't make the effort, you might have a few resource upsets here. Now, if you put Pluto and Scorpio right here at the 0 degree mark, you go halfway around and Mercury and Taurus will make oppositions to the Pluto and Scorpios. That's approximately 1988 to 1983 that you're going to get 3 Mercury oppositions to Pluto. You guys, you're a little younger. You're in your 20s. Some of you might be in your 30s, early 30s. You know, you are the ones that could have resource upsets. You're the ones that could have relationship upsets. You know, Pluto and Scorpios, there's a little codependency going on, and we have to learn Taurian self-reliance so the rug can get pulled out underneath you if you're too codependent and you're pretty young in relationships yet. So that could be some possibilities. Some of you may be recognizing your Pluto polarity points Taurus. If you're really working with this Mercury retrograde and deepening inner self-reliance, your generation could be then recognizing resources of power that you want to merge with and evolve, grow, make leaps of growth. You could be discovering new ways to make a living out there in the world. My nephew, the woodmaker, Pluto's in Scorpio, but it's earlier degrees. He won't have Mercury opposite by aspect, but he will have it generationally by sign. So almost everything I spoke about in this Mercury retrograde webinar is emphasized for these Pluto and Scorpios by generation and more intensely by opposition aspect for those approximately 1988 to 1993. Now, let me go back and show you one more thing. I didn't do the Pluto Libras. You guys are going to have, let me see, the Taurus to Libra generation is going to be the waning in conjunct. You're going to have some of the outer adjustments in relationships. Pluto Libras, however you get affected with this, you might find yourself, Pluto Libras are going to be surprised with the relationship things that are going on. If you're in relationship, make the effort to listen, communicate, and change. Otherwise, you may find, again, some of those relationship upsets going on. Now, let's look for instance right here. Here's Pluto. We're not going to put Pluto on the ascendant. That's the natural zodiac to show you the phases. But for instance, when you're looking at how Mercury's aspecting Pluto for the U.S. chart, here's a Pluto Capricorn, 9th house, 27 degrees. You go in a counterclockwise manner, okay? Mercury goes retrograde at 23.5 Taurus. It does not quite make a waxing trine. So Mercury, transiting Mercury, is first quarter phase to Pluto. Comes within orb of an aspect, within 4 degrees, but it doesn't make the aspect. So you start with the slower moving planet, you go in a counterclockwise fashion to the faster moving planet, whether it's a transiting planet or a natal. And with the nodes, you always compare them to a planet in a clockwise fashion. All right? I'll show you this one. Let's back up here just to show this to you. But again, more details, I'd highly recommend the cycle of phases and aspects. You start with Mercury, clockwise to the south node, backwards, waxing sextile. You keep going all the way around, and you have a waning trine of the north node to natal Mercury. All right? And this is stationary direct, so Mercury is at its conjunction and move behind. I won't go into any more aspects. Hopefully you've gotten the point with a few of these. And if not, again, recommend the workshop to you. Leroy, other questions?
Well, anyway, no relevant to the material tonight on the board. Some personal stuff coming in and a lot of appreciation for the effort, Kim. So we covered a lot in a couple hours, didn't we?
All right. Well, thank you, Leroy, for always running the Q&A board and helping me answer some of the little details so I can stay focused on the material. Here's all my questions that I always make up for the Mercury retrograde. For this one in Taurus, how do I breathe, relax, and move through any pressures? Pressure will be building up, fixed modality. How do I reach equilibrium with any upsets? How are my values changing? What do I really desire in my life? What is ready to be released? How do I strengthen my inner self? How am I my best resource? So you can refer to these questions from time to time as you go through this Mercury retrograde. And finally, I told you I had some photos of my early spring flowers, lamium or dead nettle, baby hyacinth, the grape hyacinth, my daffodils, my bleeding heart. I love this plant. I love all these plants. And here's my crocus. I love all my plants. They're my babies. Here's my crocus that came up a little earlier. And so one of my greatest pleasures is gardening and sharing photos with you. And I thought this was a nice quote. Self-reverence, self-knowledge, self-control. These three alone lead one to sovereign power. And of course, this is a quote by Alfred Lloyd Tennyson. And so I thought the Taurus-Scorpio polarity, this is a good quote. Self-reverence, self-knowledge, self-control. These three alone lead one to sovereign power. Finally, my old familiar slide. You can get this t-shirt from Zazzle.com. I survived Mercury retrograde. Here's our future Mercury retrogrades. Our next one is going to be August 30th to September 21st in Virgo. And we'll have a webinar August 29th at 6 p.m. and it will be another one of our free Mercury Retrograde webinars. So for all of you, thank you very much for passing this webinar on to family and friends and whoever's interested in astrology, and spreading the principles of EA and the work of EAN. We appreciate you very much. I'm going to take it a little easy this summer. Our Mars retrograde, again, we've already had the class, but that's up on the forecasting webinars. I'm going to do one more webinar. Well, at this point, I'm taking some time off in May, and I'm going to have a June webinar. I might have to change that. Nope, it's the week before. Trying to manage all the stuff in the summer. I haven't done an update on time and money for a while, and I just want to revisit some things and update some things with the state of the world's finances. So look for that to come in future newsletters, and you can enroll in that webinar if you'd like. And again, 25% discount, everything's sale priced on the Learning Pass page. So you can surely visit there on the website and give yourself some study materials over the summer. And in the meantime, thank you all very, very much for tuning in. And Leroy and I wish you all the best in staying calm through this Mercury retrograde, being open-minded and going through the flow and really working on valuing yourself. Adios, everyone.